you've proudly been boasting, and I think it's actually probably true, that you are at this point the most substantive candidate in the race in the sense of detailed policy prescriptions. Do you have any sense that that is breaking through with voters? And if so, what is that? Where do you get that evidence?
Just the town hall meetings. You know, John, it seems like people have taken the time to read some of the stuff, and they ask really good questions. And I've had any number of people come up to me and say, thanks for answering my question directly. They won't necessarily reference something they've read, but they'll say, thanks for answering the question directly. And that's the substance I'm giving them. So that's the kind of anecdotal evidence. I don't think we'll all really know about whether this approach was successful or not until February 9th. But I think it's the way I'm comfortable doing it, and I think it's what we need to do for the country. You
had an ad last week where you talked about, you did a foreign policy ad, and some of that came up just now in this event you did today. And you talk at the end of that ad, the quote, I believe, is, I'll read it for you here at the end. You make this point. You made it on stage here, too. You said, President's top priority is to protect the United States of America, and I'm the only one in this race who has had at least some small part in that responsibility. And you talk about your role as U.S. Attorney.
Yep.
Do you think that you have better national security credentials than any other Republican in the race?
I think I have different ones. Mine are specifically focused on terrorism and the intelligence and law enforcement effort to interdict terrorism and to try to make sure that attacks don't happen in the homeland. So I don't have necessarily better than everybody else, but I have different ones, ones that they don't have.
You say that you are the only one who had played at least a small part in the protection of the United States. So that you're saying that none of the 4 U.S. senators you're running against has had any role in protecting the United States?
No, not a real role, no.
Right, so Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio, all those guys, none.
Well, I know which ones are the senators, yeah. I mean, you know, my view is that, you know, the legislature debates these things and discusses these things. I'm not saying they don't know anything about it. I'm talking about the role that somebody like me in that type of executive position had versus one who's marking up a bill in a subcommittee. Yeah, I think that's a real difference.
You talked a lot today about Iran and the Iran deal, which you're very critical of, and you said at one point, you talked about it was disastrous for Israel, this deal. One of your fellow candidates, Mike Huckabee, the other day, also thinks it's disastrous for Israel and went so far as to say that the president was leading Israelis up to the door of the ovens, gas ovens. How do you feel about that comment? Do you think it's that disastrous for Israel? Do you agree with Governor Huckabee?
I don't agree with the hyperbolic nature of the comment, and I also think that it's somewhat offensive to Israelis. Israelis have a right of self-determination, as I said up there today, too. Yeah. And they have the right to defend themselves. No one's going to lead them anywhere. Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Knesset are going to make a judgment about what they want to do to protect Israel's national security. So I thought it was kind of off-key in a number of different ways and something that I wouldn't have said. As you know, I have severe concerns about the agreement, but I would not have used that kind of language, because not only because I think it's too hyperbolic, but also because I don't think it acknowledges appropriately the role that Israel has in its own self-determination for its own national security.
Do you think that kind of hyperbolic language is not constructive in terms of the kind of debate we need to have on substance?
I think it's distracting.
It's distracting.
It allows the president then to do what he did in Africa, which was talk about the statement rather than be pinned down on the specific deficiencies of the agreement. We should be only talking, in my opinion, about the specific deficiencies of the agreement as we see them, and forcing the president to respond to those. When we say things like Governor Huckabee said, we give the president an out. And you saw what he did in Africa yesterday. That's all he wanted to talk about.
Sure.
And so that tells you two things. One, it wasn't a smart statement to make politically. And two, substantively, the president can't defend the agreement.
Let me ask you a couple of political questions, sure. Obviously. We are a little over a week away from the first Republican debate. There was a fantastic quote, I believe, tweeted by the chief strategist for another candidate, John Kasich's chief strategist, John Weaver, who said that if you imagine what it'd be like for a NASCAR driver to be preparing for a race in which you knew that one of the other drivers would be drunk, that is what preparing for a debate with Donald Trump is like. That's a pretty good quote.
I don't agree with it, but...
You don't? In what way?
No,
why not?
No, because, you know, I just think that all this attention and focus on Donald Trump is misplaced. And I've said that any number of times. And so for Governor, I can't believe that's what John Kasich thinks. I know John Kasich. John Kasich's not worried about Donald Trump walking into this debate. He's worried about John Kasich. And I'm worried about Chris Christie and communicating my message. So that's why I try not to listen to political consultants too much, because they say stuff like that, and then then John Casey's going to have to answer to that.
You
Does he think Donald Trump's a drunk? I mean, come on.
You were asked by a voter yesterday, I believe, about Trump, and I know you're generally not liking to talk about Trump much. But
if voters ask me, I'll answer.
But you said on the record, you said to this voter that he hurt the credibility of the party. And
I said no, that's not what I said, and that's the way it was reported. What I said was that when he says things like, we don't need to do any Social Security reform at all. Right. I'm going to make everybody so rich they're not going to need to worry about Social Security. Then I said that, like, my view on it, knowing Donald, he's smarter and better than that. And he could come up with a plan to deal with Social Security. He could come up with a plan to deal with immigration. And that's why I've said all along about Donald. He's going to be as serious a candidate as he wants to be. So what I said was he hurts the credibility of his potential presidency by saying stuff like that. And that's what I meant. I don't think he has any effect on the party at all. I don't think any of us have any effect on the party at all, unless and until one of us is the nominee. Then we speak for the party. Then we got to be concerned about not only the effect of the words that come out of our mouth on us, but on the broader party and down ticket. Right now, I don't think anything that Donald Trump says today is going to affect down ticket in 16.
All right, I got one more question for you. I actually have two, but we don't have time for the longer one, which would have to do with marijuana, where you and I would have like a fist fight over this issue, so I'm not going to do that.
Why don't you do that one? Because I'd love to have a fist fight with you. It'd be really great.
Okay, I'm going to ask you another one, though. I'm going to ask you another one, all right? I was shocked when I saw, given the choice between Bruce Springsteen and John Bon Jovi, that you sided with John Bon Jovi. I got nothing against John Bon Jovi.
Right.
But as I understood it, you were the ultimate Springsteen fan.
I am a huge Springsteen fan.
And there are those who are now saying in the headlines that this is the biggest flip-flop of Chris Christie's career.
It's not.
Explain this, what's happened here.
Because John's a friend. And the way I interpreted what Laura was asking me was, if you had to choose between Bruce Springsteen and Bon Jovi, not their music, but choose between them.
Oh, well, then now you've opened the door.
Sure, John's become a friend over the last few years, and so and Bruce, I have a cordial relationship with.
Right.
We know each other. We've worked on some things together. But John and Dorothea have become friends of mine and Mary Pat's, and so Mary Pat and I answered it the same way, even though I've been to 124 Bruce Springsteen shows, and I think I've been to 4 Bon Jovi shows. So from a music perspective, Bruce is in my history, but John's become a friend.
But I'll ask you the question then. Desert Island Discs, right? If you were going to an island and you could only take the catalog of one or the other, who would you take?
Catalog?
You could take the catalog of one or the other. You pick. Springsteen or
well, I would
Bon
take
Jovi.
Springsteen.
Okay.
Right, so everybody kind of misunderstood my answer. I understood the question from Laura Ingraham to be a personal question. And Mary Pat and I both answered it quickly, immediately, the same way, because John and Dorothea become friends. But if I was going on a desert island and I could only take one set of music, I've lived with the Springsteen music a lot longer than I've lived with John's music. It's much more evocative of my youth, and so I would enjoy that a lot more.
I want to say, for the sake of history and for the sake of my own well-being, thank you for clarifying that matter.
I'm glad. I'm glad you gave me the opportunity, John, because others would be concerned, I'm sure, as well. America is probably very concerned about that, so I'm glad we straightened it out.